Boom, right at you. Hey, I'm going to drop the bomb in this episode, and we're going to look at this poem by Gregory Corso, a beat poet, called Bomb. And we're going to look at a bunch of other poems, and we're going to get loose. We're going to get crazy. So let's just talk about this, right? Okay. Budger of history, break of time, you bomb, toy of universe, grandest of all, snatched sky, I cannot hate you, and on it goes. Wow, this is just this punk rock, with this lively language, incandescent language, and the shape of the poem is really eye-catching too. Now, what I want to talk to you about in this episode here is what about the shape of poems, huh? Why is this poem shaped this way? Well, it's shaped this way because Gregory Corso contorted the lines to make them work this way and put these spaces in between words so it lines up this way, okay? If you're sitting in the audience and you've never seen this poem on the page before and Gregory Corso reads it, you're not going to know it's shaped this way. You're just going to think it's like any other poem, like it's shaped the way poems should be shaped, like normal human poems. And then when you see it, you're going to be like, that's super cool. And if he handed it out in advance before he read it, then it'd be this cool, like, double threat thing. But ultimately, the shape of this very cool punk rock poem by Gregory Corso is superficial, right? It's an ornament. It's not fundamental to the sound of the poem. It's only appealing to the eye. So that's a superficial engagement with shape. Okay? Now, why is that? If we go back a billion years to John Dryden here, we can see that Dryden is working in this iambic pentameter and yada yada. I've talked a lot about that. Everything is going to be end-stopped. Everything is going to be end-stopped here on these first lines. All human things are subject to decay, and when fate summons, monarchs must obey. So we also have these rhymes, right? This Flecknoe found, who like Augustus young was called to empire and had governed long. So because of the end rhymes and because of the iambic pentameter, if you're sitting in the audience back in the day and you're hearing him read this, you're going to start to chuckle a little bit because it's funny as fuck. And you're going to be like, wow, John Dryden writes some elite iambic pentameter quips. And you're going to know what it's going to look like on the page because you're hearing the iambic pentameter really, really, really easily. So there's nothing superficial about the shape of this poem. He's not really doing anything with the shape of the poem besides just putting it down there. But the way it looks to the eye and the way it registers to the ear is like the same goddamn thing, right? There's like no difference between the two. Okay? Let's look at this Auden poem, Musée des Beaux-Arts. About suffering, they were never wrong. The old masters, how well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. So there is a little bit of rhyme and meter in this poem, but it's not super, super strict. It's a little loose. And if you heard Auden read it, maybe in his English, which, oh my God, maybe in Auden's English. My point is, maybe in Auden's English you would hear something, maybe you wouldn't, but the beginning, middle, and end of it is people hearing this poem might not instantly be able to delineate what they heard. Now, Auden isn't doing that much complicated with delineation anyway, so it probably wouldn't be the end of the world if you recorded this poem a little bit differently than what he wrote out. So he's not being too clever with the way he's breaking these lines. It's convincing enough the way it is. It's not really like a problem poem, but I'm just indicating that just because you're a formalist like Auden was known to be, it doesn't mean anyone can instantly understand how to delineate the poem. Nevertheless, we can't say that the way he's written this poem out is ornamental. It's not ornamental. It's just, it's a relatively straightforward approach. Okay. Let's look at this inauguration poem by Amanda Gorman, The Hill We Climb. When the day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We brave the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, etc., etc. It's more like Dryden. Now, Dryden's poem is strict iambic pentameter and always has the couplets, and Gorman here is more varied. But I guess I kind of feel like because so many of these lines are end stopped, if you're sitting in the audience and you had an audio recording of it, you played it again and again and wrote it down, I think you'd get pretty close. You might miss some of these, of what just isn't always justice. Maybe you'd end up putting that on the same line. You wouldn't have a break right here after the is. I don't know. But you'd get pretty damn close, and it really wouldn't matter that much. You'd capture the essence of what she intended because she's primarily working in an aural form. She's appealing to the ear. So there's nothing ornamental about this poem, the way it's written down, at all. Okay? Let's look at this. Mung Mi Kim. Mung Mi Kim, actually, you can hear her recite it, although if you click play, a lot of it is explaining how, the poem really can't be recited in any consistent way. So it's kind of a long preamble about that. So it's not really a recitation. It's kind of a big mess of how, of what a problem she's made on the page, which I'm sure she's quite proud of. And I'm sure people love this poem for the complexity that it's unclear to me. Accumulation of land, maintain household, bear, labor of house, child. Maybe you read it that way, or maybe you read it downward instead. Accumulation of land, cooking, reserve line. You can even read it across. I think she does that when she recites accumulation of land, belonging to, bearing, child rearing. I don't know. You can do a lot of different things. You can just look at this poem and think about it and consider it, which is probably what she thought. Maybe you could read some parts aloud and some parts you just keep inside your head. But this entire presentation is totally disconnected from any aural, any spoken recitation type of thing. There's just totally different animals. This poem lives on the page only. It's strictly decoratory. It's like an art installation. It's pure presentation. That doesn't make it bad, doesn't make it evil, doesn't make it any of those things, doesn't make her less accomplished as a poet or anything like that. It just means her focus, she's putting her poetic talents and gifts into presenting the poem, not into how it sounds. All right, let's look at this Claudia Rankine poem. What does it mean to want an age-old call for change, not to change, and yet also to feel bullied by the call to change? How is a call to change named shame, named penance, named chastisement? So there's a lot of very fascinating aural, sonic dimensions to this, the kind of internal rhymes and assonances and consonances. And it's extremely layered and complex, has these rhetorical elements. But there's no way anyone could predict how this poem would be laid out on the page. If you heard her reading it, unlike Amanda Gorman's poem, really, I would have no way to predict that this line was going to be really long and that these two would be broken and that then there would be an extra empty line here for some reason because I fucking feel like it. Now, again, no beef. It's Claudia Rankine. It's a cool poem. I actually really like this poem a lot. It is a fact that a lot of this poem's appeal is how it's laid out on the page. And that's just how it is. There's no way you could say that if you heard her read it aloud, you would know how the hell it's supposed to be laid out. Okay? Facts. Real true facts. This poem has taken forever to load because it's an erasure poem. Again, really cool idea. And there's really no way to recite it. Unless you handed out the poem in advance, there's just no way to recite this. It's just not going to work. No one's going to understand it unless they can see it. This is strictly a visual poem. It is 100% an art project. It is 0% a aural thing that could be heard and understood without seeing it on the page. Zero. Okay? It belongs in a museum, which is super, super cool. Does it belong in a literary magazine? Clearly, many editors think it does. And that is their prerogative. Okay. Right next door, okay, publishing probably around the same time. Here's a guy, late 20th century, early 21st century, still alive. Mark Jarman, still doing great stuff. This is a sonnet. It's a formal sonnet. If you know your sonnets and you heard anyone read this aloud, it would occur to you it were a sonnet. And if you had time then to record it, it would come out like this. It would come out exactly like this. To lie in your child's bed when she is gone is calming as anything I know. To fall asleep, her books arranged above your head, is to admit that you have never been so tired, so enchanted by the spell. You see what I'm overemphasizing the iambic nature of it, but these rhymes, they are going to start to occur to you that this poem is a sonnet, and that it's divided into an octave, into a sestet, and people with any type of experience studying formal poetry, they will be able to hear this sooner or later. Some very quickly, some more slowly, but certainly with repetition, it will become inevitable. 0% ornamentation, 100% aural fidelity. Doesn't give Mark Jarman bonus points. It just means it is what it is. Some editors are going to want to see this. Some editors are going to fucking hate it. Now, how do we end up with Mark Jarman being in the minority and on the fringe and Claudia Rankine being at the center? Well, it has a lot to do with people like this. William Carlos Williams, toward the beginning of the 20th century, wrote a poem like this based on the ideas of Ezra Pound and others and the progression of imagism into modernism, that poems should first and foremost have a very strong, that the sonic element of it should be tied to the visual impression, that these two should be in harmony. And this was an idea that Pound derived from his understandings and misunderstandings of Asian poetry, Chinese poetry, Japanese poetry, which he probably didn't really know his ass from a hole in the wall on these topics, but he was very impressed with these languages and their poetry and decided he wanted to make English verse look and work more like this and put a primacy on how things look, and particularly the images in a poem. Right? So different, this man and this woman, a stream flowing in a field. Again, the centrality of one image in this poem in a few short lines. Now, if you heard William Carlos Williams read this aloud, or you heard me read it aloud, you might come close to delineation, you might not. You could read this in a variety of different ways. So different, this man and this woman. A stream flowing in a field. Or so different, this man and this woman. A stream flowing in a field. You would delineate it in different ways. Now, the way that William Carlos Williams decided to delineate it works successfully on the page, and that's awesome. But this, I would say, is like 50-50. It's a coin toss to me. It's somewhat ornamental, and it's somewhat has some fidelity to the sound. He's kind of trying to have his cake and eat it too, which is kind of probably where most poetry is today. I'm not saying that's good, and I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying that's probably where most poetry published today falls somewhere between these poles, and the ideas of modernism still kind of sort of are kind of normal in terms of what editors and readers expect. Here we have a Derek Walcott poem, and you can see exactly how this is kind of being this tradition is being rebalanced by, in my opinion, one of the greatest practitioners of all time, Derek Walcott. So this is late 20th century. The fist clenched round my heart loosens a little, and I gasp brightness, but it tightens again. When have I ever not loved the pain of love? But this is moved past love to mania. So we could see, if you were hearing this poem, you wouldn't exactly know where to lineate it. But when, as an experienced reader, I'm reading it, you can kind of feel these echoes of the sonnet. You can kind of feel these echoes of formal poetry in there, even though it doesn't have a fixed number of beats and it doesn't have end rhymes. It has devices and techniques that approximate that and kind of trick your eye a little bit into kind of feeling as if you're reading a sonnet again. And there's a kind of a genius to this relationship he has to the past and his ability to play with these boundaries and push them. I don't think that there's any one correct way to like look at these rhymes, but like loved and moved, those are rhymes. Tightens and heart, they have some of the similar sounds in them. Not identical, but it's similar. This brightness helps gasp. I don't know. It is subjective. So for me, this is truly transportingly beautiful. But as a complete high fidelity, if you heard this read, you would lineate it a little bit differently. And two expert poets would lineate it a little bit differently. Many expert poets would love the way this poem has been lineated and would admire it, but they wouldn't necessarily lineate their own poems in the exact same way. So again, we're closer to this, maybe not quite as arbitrary as this lineation, but fairly arbitrary. Maybe we could say this is 60% fidelity, right? 60%. Okay. Let's look at one more. I don't know this poet. I just stumbled upon this poem. This poet is Mark Smith Soto. Let's just look at this poem a little bit. The door is always open, Epictetus once whispered in my ear, when I had no idea he was one of the great teachers. A yard sale find, that skinny book, a shadow of mold winging its back cover, the one golden word that turned out to be a name embossed on its spine. Why cling on to pain? The ancient gentle voice explained. So, again, there's not a formal rhyme scheme or number of beats. We're approximating iambic here. The door is always open, Epictetus. So it's iambic there. We have this no and shadow. They have a loose rhyme there. Epictetus, teachers. It's a stretch, right? But if you heard this poem aloud because of this near iambicness and these loose rhymes, and you were given a lot of time, I'm stretching it a little bit, you might decide that this could be prosecuted, organized into quatrains, 4-line stanzas. The second 4-line stanza here of mold winging its back cover, that one on one on, name explained. Again, there's a little bit of stretch, but it's fairly close. He's working in these confines of traditional expectations around the aural shape of a poem. And he's organized this that way, possibly because he's talking about his own relationship to precedent, his own relationship to ancient inspiration, to what has come before him. So it's a good fit for the poem. Is this poem lessons? Perfect fidelity, but no. But it's got to have more fidelity than this Derek Walcott. We're probably up to 70-75% here. So again, we have this big, exciting spectrum. I want you, when you're looking at your poems and you're reading other people's poems, to bear this in mind. That to me, personally, now every poet's different. When I get below 50%, when I get to like 40-30% fidelity to the aural shape, the shape in the air, I start to get bored. And I personally wouldn't want my own poetry to float around there. And I want to reshape it towards a higher degree of fidelity. But I don't write that much stuff that's at 100%. I don't write like Dryden, okay? And it's fine if you like Mark Jarman, you want to go for 100, near or at that 100%. There could be bonus points for doing that. It's super, super cool. But I would say for most of us, trying to perhaps push ourselves to achieve a little bit more might be helpful, might help us grow and expand. It might make us stronger poets in the long term, especially if we can use that as an opportunity for play, the way Mark Smith Soto so beautifully does in this poem. Thanks for your time. Thanks for dropping in. We'll talk soon, I'm sure.